They say that some family bonds run deeper than marriage vows, but I never expected to discover that my wife had been systematically stealing from our joint accounts to fund her mother's secret gambling addiction. My name is Oliver, and this is the story of how uncovering my wife's financial deception led me to expose my mother-in-law's manipulation, and how I orchestrated a revenge so comprehensive that it destroyed the toxic relationship that had been poisoning our marriage from the beginning. My wife Jessica and I had been married for 6 years when her mother Dorothy began experiencing what she described as serious financial difficulties. Dorothy had always been somewhat dramatic about money, but she claimed that unexpected medical expenses and home repairs had created a financial crisis that threatened her ability to maintain her lifestyle and keep her house. Jessica was deeply concerned about her mother's situation and felt a strong obligation to help her through this difficult period. Dorothy had raised Jessica as a single mother after her father left when Jessica was young, and Jessica felt that she owed her mother support during her time of need. I was supportive of Jessica's desire to help her mother, and we agreed to provide Dorothy with some financial assistance to help her address her immediate expenses. We sent her several $1,000s to help with what she claimed were urgent medical bills and home maintenance costs. However, Dorothy's financial problems seemed to persist and even worsen over time. She would call Jessica regularly with new crises and emergencies that required additional financial support. There were always new medical expenses, home repairs, car problems, or other urgent costs that Dorothy claimed she couldn't handle on her own. Jessica felt increasingly stressed and guilty about her mother's ongoing financial struggles. She would often suggest that we send Dorothy more money to help her get back on her feet, and she seemed to feel personally responsible for her mother's well-being and financial security. I began to feel concerned about the frequency and amounts of money we were sending to Dorothy. Over the course of several months, we had provided her with more than $10,000 in financial assistance, but her problems never seemed to be resolved. Instead, each payment seemed to be followed by new crises that required additional support. When I suggested that we might need to set some limits on our financial assistance to Dorothy, Jessica became defensive and emotional. She accused me of being unsympathetic to her mother's struggles and suggested that I didn't understand the importance of family loyalty and support. Jessica also began to take a more active role in managing our finances, claiming that she wanted to ensure that we could continue to help her mother while still meeting our own financial obligations. She started handling more of our bill paying and account management, which I initially appreciated since it reduced my administrative responsibilities. However, after several more months of ongoing financial support to Dorothy, I began to notice some concerning patterns in our household finances. Despite both of us earning good salaries, our savings seemed to be growing much more slowly than expected, and our monthly expenses appeared to be higher than our budget projections suggested they should be. When I mentioned these concerns to Jessica, she explained that our increased expenses were primarily due to the financial support we were providing to her mother, along with various other unexpected costs that had impacted our budget. She suggested that our financial progress was slower because we were prioritizing family support over personal savings. These explanations seemed reasonable at first, and I trusted Jessica's management of our finances. I assumed that she was keeping accurate records of our expenses, and that our slower financial progress was simply the result of our generosity toward Dorothy. But as more time passed, I continued to feel concerned about our financial situation. Our credit card balances seemed to be higher than usual, and our savings account wasn't growing at the rate that our income should have supported, even accounting for the money we were sending to Dorothy. I decided to take a more active role in monitoring our finances and began reviewing our bank statements and credit card bills more carefully. What I discovered was shocking and revealed a pattern of deception that went far beyond what I had suspected. The bank statements showed that Jessica had been making regular transfers from our joint accounts to an external account that I didn't recognize. These transfers were in addition to the money we had agreed to send to Dorothy, and they were occurring with suspicious regularity, usually once or twice per month. The amounts of these additional transfers varied, but they were typically between $500 and $1,000 each. Over the course of the previous year, Jessica had transferred more than $20,000 from our joint accounts to this mysterious external account. When I asked Jessica about these transfers, she became evasive and claimed that they were additional payments to help her mother with ongoing expenses that she hadn't wanted to burden me with. She suggested that Dorothy's financial problems were more serious than she had initially revealed, and that the extra money was necessary to prevent her mother from losing her house. But when I asked for more specific information about these payments and Dorothy's financial situation, Jessica became defensive and accused me of being suspicious and controlling about money. She claimed that I was questioning her judgment and her commitment to helping her family. This response troubled me because it was inconsistent with Jessica's usual openness about financial matters. Throughout our marriage, she had always been willing to discuss our expenses and financial decisions, and she had never been secretive or defensive about money-related questions. I decided to conduct a more thorough investigation of our financial accounts and Jessica's activities. I obtained detailed statements for all of our accounts and began analyzing our spending patterns and cash flows over the previous year. What I discovered was even more disturbing than I had initially suspected. The external account that Jessica had been transferring money to was not an account belonging to Dorothy, as she had claimed. Instead, it was a personal account that Jessica had opened in her own name without telling me. Jessica had been systematically transferring money from our joint accounts to her private account, and she had been using Dorothy's supposed financial crisis as a cover story to justify the missing money. She had been exploiting my sympathy for her mother's situation to steal from our shared resources. But the deception went even deeper than Jessica's theft. When I investigated Dorothy's actual financial situation, I discovered that she was not experiencing the medical and home maintenance crises that Jessica had described. Instead, Dorothy had been using the money we sent her to fund a serious gambling addiction that she had been hiding from both Jessica and me. Dorothy had been gambling regularly at local casinos and had accumulated significant debts from her addiction. The financial crises that she had been reporting to Jessica were actually the result of her gambling losses, not legitimate medical or home expenses. Most shocking of all, I discovered that Dorothy and Jessica had been working together to manipulate me and steal money from our joint accounts. Dorothy would create fake financial crises to justify requests for money, and Jessica would use these requests as cover to steal additional money for herself. The money that Jessica had been transferring to her private account was being used to fund a lifestyle that she had been hiding from me. Her account showed purchases for expensive clothes, jewelry, spa treatments, and other luxury items that were far beyond what our agreed-upon budget would have allowed. Jessica had also been using some of the stolen money to enable Dorothy's gambling addiction by providing her with additional cash beyond what we had officially agreed to send. She had been helping her mother hide the extent of her gambling problem while simultaneously stealing money for her own personal use. I realized that Jessica and Dorothy had been running an elaborate con game against me, using fake financial crises and emotional manipulation to steal money from our marriage. They had been exploiting my trust and my desire to support family to fund both Dorothy's gambling addiction and Jessica's secret spending. The most painful aspect of their deception was understanding that every conversation we had about helping Dorothy and every dollar I had agreed to send had been contaminated by their lies. They had been presenting themselves as a family in crisis while actually using our shared resources to fund their selfish and destructive behavior. I also understood that Jessica's increased involvement in managing our finances had been motivated by her need to conceal her theft and to maintain access to our joint accounts. She had been trying to control our financial information to prevent me from discovering her systematic deception. I decided that both Jessica and Dorothy needed to face consequences for their systematic theft and manipulation, but I wanted to gather comprehensive evidence of their crimes before confronting them. I wanted them to understand that their deception had been discovered and documented, and that they would face appropriate legal and personal consequences. The plan I developed was designed to expose both Jessica's theft and Dorothy's gambling addiction in a way that would be undeniable and devastating. I wanted them to realize that their elaborate con game had been completely unraveled and that they would face serious consequences for their betrayal. Phase 1 involved documenting the full extent of Jessica's theft by analyzing all of the transfers she had made to her private account and gathering evidence of how she had used the stolen money. I wanted to create a comprehensive record of her financial crimes. Phase 2 involved investigating Dorothy's gambling addiction by monitoring her activities and gathering evidence of her casino visits and gambling debts. I wanted to expose the real reason behind her supposed financial crises. Phase 3 involved consulting with attorneys and financial advisors to understand my legal options for addressing both Jessica's theft and Dorothy's fraud. I wanted to explore both civil and criminal remedies for their systematic deception. Phase 4 was more personal and involved confronting both Jessica and Dorothy with evidence of their crimes in a way that would force them to acknowledge the full scope of their betrayal. The final phase involved the legal and practical steps necessary to end my marriage, recover the stolen money, and ensure that both Jessica and Dorothy faced appropriate consequences for their systematic theft and manipulation. The investigation phase took several weeks, during which I carefully documented Jessica's financial activities and monitored Dorothy's behavior. I hired a private investigator to follow Dorothy and gather evidence of her gambling activities at local casinos. The evidence I gathered was comprehensive and damning. Dorothy was indeed gambling regularly, often multiple times per week, and she had accumulated tens of thousands of dollars in gambling debts. The financial crises she had been reporting to Jessica were entirely fabricated to cover up her gambling losses. I also discovered that Jessica had been fully aware of her mother's gambling addiction and had been helping her hide it from me. Some of the money Jessica had stolen from our accounts had been used to pay Dorothy's gambling debts and to provide her with additional cash for gambling. The confrontation happened on a Saturday afternoon in November, exactly 8 months after I had first noticed the unusual transfer patterns in our bank statements. I had arranged for both Jessica and Dorothy to come to our house, claiming that I wanted to discuss Dorothy's ongoing financial situation and our family's budget. Instead of engaging in the financial planning discussion they expected, I presented both Jessica and Dorothy with comprehensive documentation of Jessica's theft, evidence of Dorothy's gambling addiction, and proof of their collaboration in deceiving me about Dorothy's supposed financial crises. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. I had financial records showing Jessica's systematic theft, photographic evidence of Dorothy's casino visits, documentation of her gambling debts, and records proving that they had been working together to manipulate me. Both Jessica and Dorothy's reactions were initially ones of shock and panic as they realized that their elaborate deception had been discovered and documented in detail. They tried to deny the evidence at first, with Dorothy claiming that her casino visits were social activities and Jessica insisting that her transfers had been legitimate family support. But the evidence was too comprehensive and specific for their denials to be credible. I had documentation showing not just Jessica's theft and Dorothy's gambling, but also evidence of their coordination and collaboration in deceiving me about the true nature of Dorothy's financial problems. When they realized that denial wasn't working, they changed tactics and tried to blame each other for the deception. Dorothy claimed that Jessica had pressured her to ask for money, while Jessica accused her mother of manipulating her into stealing from our accounts. But I was not interested in their attempts to shift blame or minimize their crimes. Both of them had participated in systematic theft and fraud, and both of them needed to face the consequences of their choices. That afternoon, I also revealed that I had consulted with attorneys about my legal options for addressing both Jessica's theft and Dorothy's fraud. I told them that I planned to pursue both civil and criminal remedies to recover the stolen money and to hold them accountable for their systematic deception. I explained that Jessica's theft from our joint accounts constituted criminal fraud, and that Dorothy's use of false pretenses to obtain money also constituted criminal fraud. I wanted them to understand that they would both face serious legal and financial consequences for their actions. Both Jessica and Dorothy were devastated to learn that their crimes could result in criminal charges and that they might face prosecution for their systematic deception. They begged me to handle the matter privately and suggested that we could resolve the issue through family counseling rather than legal action. But I had already made the decision that my marriage was over and that both Jessica and Dorothy needed to face appropriate consequences for their crimes. Their systematic deception had destroyed the trust that was essential to our relationship, and their theft had damaged our financial security and our future together. The legal and financial consequences for both Jessica and Dorothy were swift and comprehensive. I filed for divorce immediately, citing Jessica's theft and fraud as grounds for the dissolution of our marriage. The evidence I had gathered provided clear documentation of her crimes, making it impossible for her to contest the divorce or claim an equal share of our assets. I also filed civil lawsuits against both Jessica and Dorothy for theft, fraud, and conspiracy, seeking to recover all of the money they had stolen plus damages for the harm their actions had caused. The evidence of their systematic deception and collaboration made these lawsuits straightforward and likely to succeed. Most importantly, I shared the evidence of their crimes with law enforcement authorities who specialized in financial crimes. Both Jessica's theft from our joint accounts and Dorothy's fraudulent requests for money constituted serious criminal fraud, and they both faced the possibility of prosecution and imprisonment. Jessica was forced to return all of the money she had stolen from our joint accounts, but she was also required to pay additional damages for the harm her theft had caused to our marriage and our financial security. The court recognized that her systematic deception had been particularly egregious because it had involved exploiting family relationships. Dorothy was also held accountable for her role in the fraud and was required to return the money she had received under false pretenses. She was forced to confront her gambling addiction and to seek treatment as part of her legal settlement. The most satisfying aspect of their exposure was watching both Jessica and Dorothy realize that their attempt to exploit family loyalty and emotional manipulation had ultimately led to the destruction of our family relationships and their own legal troubles. They had thought they were being clever by using Dorothy's supposed financial crisis as a cover story for their theft and manipulation. But they had failed to consider that their systematic deception would eventually be discovered and that their crimes would have serious legal and personal consequences. The divorce proceedings were decisive and comprehensive. Jessica's theft and fraud were well documented through the evidence I had gathered, and she had no grounds to contest the dissolution of our marriage or to claim a significant portion of our remaining assets. Jessica was forced to return all of the money she had stolen, and Dorothy was required to repay the money she had received fraudulently. Both of them also faced ongoing legal consequences for their crimes, including potential criminal prosecution. Most importantly, I was able to rebuild my financial security and my personal life free from Jessica and Dorothy's manipulation and deception. The recovered money allowed me to restore our savings and to move forward with financial goals that their theft had delayed or prevented. The experience taught me valuable lessons about the importance of maintaining oversight of family finances and being skeptical of ongoing financial crises that never seem to be resolved. I learned that emotional manipulation can be used to cover up systematic theft and fraud. Looking back on this experience, I am proud of the way I handled the discovery of Jessica and Dorothy's crimes. I could have confronted them immediately when I first noticed the financial irregularities, but instead I took the time to gather comprehensive evidence that exposed the full scope of their deception. The marriage that I had thought was built on shared values and mutual trust had actually been undermined by systematic theft and manipulation. But the process of exposing Jessica and Dorothy's crimes had also revealed my own strength and resilience, and it had prepared me to build healthier relationships in the future. Jessica and Dorothy's theft and fraud had been interconnected crimes that had both damaged our marriage and violated the trust that was essential to our family relationships. They had been willing to exploit family loyalty and emotional bonds to steal from our shared future, and they had used deception and manipulation to cover up their crimes. The revenge I orchestrated against Jessica and Dorothy was comprehensive and devastating, but it was also necessary to protect my interests and ensure that justice was served. They had chosen to build their financial security on stolen money and fraudulent schemes, and they had to face the full consequences of their choices. The financial records that had enabled Jessica's theft had also provided the evidence that exposed both of their crimes. The irony was not lost on me that the very accounts they had used to steal money had also documented their theft and provided the proof needed to hold them accountable. In the end, Jessica and Dorothy's systematic deception had achieved the opposite of what they had intended. Instead of allowing them to steal money without consequences, their crimes had ultimately cost them their family relationships and had resulted in serious legal and financial penalties. The most important outcome of this entire experience was that I was able to reclaim my life and my financial security from Jessica and Dorothy's web of theft and manipulation. I was no longer living in a marriage built on lies and financial crimes, and I was free to build a new life based on honesty and integrity. The evidence that had exposed Jessica and Dorothy's crimes served as a reminder that systematic deception ultimately leaves traces that can be discovered and documented. Their careful planning and emotional manipulation had ultimately been no match for thorough investigation and analysis. Both Jessica and Dorothy learned that theft and fraud come with consequences that extend far beyond the immediate financial gains they are meant to achieve. They lost their family relationships, their financial security, and their freedom from legal prosecution. They discovered that the trust and love of the people closest to them, once broken through systematic betrayal, could not be easily repaired or replaced. Their crimes had destroyed not just our marriage, but also their relationship with each other as they blamed each other for their mutual downfall. The revenge was complete, the truth was exposed, and I was finally free to build a new life based on the values of honesty and financial integrity that Jessica and Dorothy had abandoned. I had won not just a legal victory in the divorce and civil proceedings, but a moral victory that validated my commitment to truth and accountability in relationships. Looking forward, I carried with me the lessons I had learned about the importance of financial oversight, the dangers of ongoing financial crises that never resolve, and the need to investigate suspicious patterns rather than accepting emotional explanations at face value. The experience had been painful and financially damaging, but it had also been educational and ultimately liberating. I had learned that I was capable of handling systematic betrayal with strategic thinking and appropriate legal action, and I had proven to myself that I would not tolerate theft and manipulation even from family members. Jessica and Dorothy's story became a cautionary tale about the dangers of using family relationships to cover up financial crimes, and about the way that addiction and greed can corrupt family bonds and destroy trust. Their downfall served as a reminder that exploiting emotional bonds for financial gain is ultimately unsustainable and self-destructive, and that systematic deception ultimately destroys not just the relationships it is meant to exploit, but the character and integrity of the people who choose deception over honesty. The joint accounts that had been meant to represent our shared financial partnership had instead become the vehicle for Jessica's systematic theft and the funding source for Dorothy's gambling addiction. But they had also provided the evidence I needed to expose their crimes and reclaim my future. In the end, the revenge was not just about recovering the money Jessica and Dorothy had stolen or exposing their fraud. It was about vindicating the principles of honesty, family loyalty, and financial integrity that they had abandoned, and about proving that systematic deception will ultimately be discovered and punished. The marriage that Jessica had destroyed through her theft and the family relationship that Dorothy had corrupted through her manipulation were replaced by a new understanding of what genuine relationships should look like, built on transparency, mutual respect, and shared commitment to honesty in all aspects of life. Their betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been educational, and I was determined to use those lessons to build better relationships in the future based on the values that truly mattered to me. Jessica and Dorothy's theft and fraud, and the elaborate deception they had constructed to cover their crimes, had ultimately cost them everything that should have mattered to them: their family relationships, their integrity, and their freedom from legal consequences. The financial records that exposed their theft and the evidence that documented their fraud served as permanent reminders that truth has a way of revealing itself, no matter how carefully people try to hide their deception behind emotional manipulation and family loyalty. The revenge was complete, justice was served, and I was finally free to move forward with my life, knowing that I had handled one of the most serious forms of personal and family betrayal with dignity, strategic thinking, and unwavering commitment to truth and legal accountability.